Alright, what's up everybody? So, how about that state of play, huh? Yeah, that really wasn't anything to write home about, unfortunately, but I caught myself feeling some kind of way about Suicide Squad that I hadn't figured before I actually would. Of course, I mean, most people seem to be heavily underwhelmed by it, to say the least, and understandably so, but I've never made it a big secret that I'm simply not the biggest fan of the superhero genre in general. I generally don't find myself caring much about superhero movies, for example. Games, I will say, are a bit of an exception, where I feel like the gameplay concept obviously lends itself very well for a video game, right? Having superpowers. So whether it's Spider-Man or the Batman series, of course, right? Or Infamous. Loved all of those games, and sometimes I will say they even caught me by surprise in terms of their story, but what I'm ultimately trying to say here is that, you know, the name Suicide Squad, I'm not really familiar with the, with the movies or something, except that I know, of course, that they take place in the DC universe and stuff, but I don't know any of those characters. I didn't really think that whether it was gonna look very good or underwhelming, I just probably wouldn't care either way. But it's especially, I think, the realization that hit me that, yeah, this is Rocksteady, right? This is literally what we've been waiting for from them for about, like, what, 8 years now since Batman Arkham Knight came out, and this is what they come up with? That's what was particularly underwhelming to me, because Batman Arkham Knight really was one of those games that, to me, it was actually the first Batman Arkham game that I played. That's why I'm specifically emphasizing on that one now, but I did go back later to play the older, some of the older ones in the series too. But yeah, man, like, Batman Arkham Knight was one of those games that went against the grain, where I did find myself truly enjoying it so much, and I hadn't expected that whatsoever. So, looking at Suicide Squad here, it's not even necessarily the gameplay that looks bad by any means. Like, I feel like it's still gonna be a fun time when you see all the characters just jumping and flying around using grappling hooks, which always, appeals to me for sure. Like, again, I'm sure that it can still be a relatively high-quality game, right? I don't think it looks terrible by any means. What people seem to be falling over a lot right now is the always online aspect. Well, basically the fact that this game looks like it was designed to be sort of a live service experience, right? You can play the game in co-op with up to 4 people in total. You can play it by yourself, but then the other characters will be controlled by AI, I guess. But yeah, they announced that there's going to be a battle pass, and then they say, of course, cosmetics only, this and that. But it's just the whole talk around it. I mean, why even include it in the first place, right? And looking at the game, like, I don't know, but just knowing that it's going to be a live service in and of itself already feels like it's problematic. And it's, it's like, it's heartwarming actually to me to see how people are finally stepping up against it, because for a while there it seemed like everybody was just casually ignoring almost every game going in that direction a couple years back, and now people are genuinely expressing that they aren't cool with it anymore, right? And like, I do think there's definitely some issues as well as far as the actual gameplay that they showed. Like, even though I talked about the grappling and the flying around that you do, every character still feels like it kind of plays the exact same way. Of course, these 4 characters, the way the developers talk about them too, they're supposed to be playing fundamentally differently, but I don't really see that from what I can tell, by the gameplay. Sure, one person grapples around and then another person can sort of just teleport, I guess, but it all basically comes down to the same thing, right? We see the same thing play out with the range of guns that you have. Like, okay, some characters get assault rifles, another character gets a pistol, and another character gets some type of, turret or a machine gun, I guess. Yeah, cool and all, but it's, probably not gonna make too much of a fundamental difference in how you play. I also feel like the gun impact, I don't know, but there's something about it, whether it's the sound effects, so you can already basically tell like how the impact is gonna feel just by judging the gameplay in itself, and it's just not all that satisfying. I saw somebody say as well that where, the Batman Arkham series obviously revolutionized melee combat in a video game, right? Because it was that system that Batman came up with that was later copied by, a game like, for example, Shadow of Mordor, and a bunch of games that have followed since. Yeah, now it's eerily sad, actually, to see this developer return to basically a combat system that we've seen, deployed in video games for literally decades now, and there's nothing really new or exciting about the Suicide Squad game. So, all in all, like, I don't think that any of these issues that I'm expressing here are necessarily things that you haven't seen other people already talk about. Everybody seems to be kind of on the exact same page when it comes to this game, and rightfully so. But for me, I think that it's also just that thinking back about Batman Arkham Knight, or just the Arkham series in general, everything about that series was just so cool. Like, you think back to Gotham, how dark and gritty that setting looked, the rain pouring down from the sky, you driving around in your Batmobile, right, where you can see the fire come out of the engines. Like, everything about that game looks cool, feels cool. When you step out of the car as Batman, I remember that so well, how he always walks around slowly, right? You always feel like a badass playing a game like that, just flying over the city, which you can see from a, just from way up in the sky. It's like, and then you look at the color palette even of a game like this. I get that it's meant to be like that, but it's just not, already in general, it's not as appealing to me. The purple, orange type colors that we've known from all these, I think back to a game like Rage, for example, very reminiscent to that, to me. And yeah, I don't know, man, it's just a little unfortunate. I heard that apparently Rocksteady initially wanted to go do a Superman game, but then those were the rumors already for such a long time. But then apparently they were forced to kind of head into this direction, perhaps by their publisher, Warner Brothers, right? Which, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the story is there. I also saw that the founders of Rocksteady, or at least two of them, I guess, left not too long ago, like November last year, I think it was. And it's like, shit, was that meant to be a sign already? I guess so. It really is an unfortunate situation all around. That's basically what I feel right now about the Suicide Squad game. Not necessarily what this video is going to be about, but it's something that people wanted me to touch on. Because yeah, state of play in general, a lot of people, well, I don't know if they necessarily had high expectations, but it is the first time in a while that we've heard from PlayStation through one of these kinds of events. Everybody is still waiting on a major PlayStation showcase, which literally hasn't happened since 2021, of course. And so it is still right now what people are waiting for. So when it comes to that, a little earlier this week, we actually had something come out about that, which is that Jeff Grubb, who of course is kind of an industry insider, seems to have his sources, but then again, he's right half of the time, it seems, and therefore I always take these things with a grain of salt, let that be very clear. But he had already prepared us for the fact that a state of play was actually going to be coming, although he had said it would be coming early March. It turned out to be coming here at the end of February, of course. And already told us as well that it was going to be low-key, but that basically Sony was saving the big stuff for a PlayStation showcase. That would be, happening a little later down the line. So exactly what he says is that Sony is saving their good stuff for the PlayStation showcase that's going to be happening before E3. It was supposed to happen last fall already. They kept pushing back because their developers simply weren't ready. Now that those developers are ready, though, they should have a massive show that really sets up the second phase of the PlayStation 5. That, of course, sounds very exciting, and many people are definitely wondering, what is PlayStation actually up to? What does their future lineup even look like? Because right now, all that we practically know is that Spider-Man 2 is supposed to still be coming out this year, 2023. That was recently confirmed, I think. Probably will be coming out around August, September, in the same vein that the original Spider-Man did back in 2018, right? But beyond that, we really don't have any clue what PlayStation is even up to right now. And some people seem a little bit frustrated about that, which I understand. But I will say that having covered PlayStation for such a long time on this channel, it's definitely a trend that I've seen in general already, where they have simply changed their marketing strategy around in a significant way. In a way that, to me also, like, I'm not gonna lie about it, but it is a little unfortunate. As a content creator, for sure, it's unfortunate that the marketing cycles for most of these game releases has significantly shrunk down in size, or in scope, I guess, where most of the big games, they don't really get a real marketing push until just a few months before they actually come out. But in the years leading up to them, we see it, for example, with a studio like Naughty Dog, which I've talked about recently, where they always used to be known for announcing their games way early in advance. And then over on this channel, I was able to cover a new trailer for Uncharted 4 basically every 6 months or so. Or there would be these developer interviews or news that came out about the game. yeah, it made it, it always made the years leading up to a launch like that feel really alive. And that was awesome. I mean, as a content creator, you can only love that kind of stuff, right? It gets you to have something to talk about. But nowadays, it's just not really the case. Like, look at a game like God of War Ragnarok, where they first revealed it to us, I think, with a trailer that merely showed a logo. Then it was during PlayStation's showcase in 2021, where we got the first trailer for it. Yeah, and then we didn't hear something for a long time once again. We thought that's where the marketing push would have started, but it actually didn't. It took until about the summer that we finally got like a release date through a PlayStation blog article, I think. And then maybe 2 or 3 months before the actual release of the game is where we finally started to see some more footage of it. And that was about it. That's just the reality of the situation. I think it's also the reality of social media, and I guess there is just so much content in general nowadays that it's not really necessary, I think, to prepare people for these kinds of, game releases more than what you're already doing right now. As long as they know that it's coming, it doesn't really seem to benefit these companies anymore to push their games way early in advance. And so Phase 2 of the PlayStation 5 definitely sounds like a very exciting way to put it. I mean, objectively, that's what it probably is. Like, we're about, 2.5 years into the life cycle right now. Assuming that it's gonna last about 7 to 8 years like usual, then yeah, like, dividing it into 3 phases, this is what the second phase would look like. I feel like now, with PlayStation 5s actually being back in stock, we already saw PlayStation basically treat this like a phase 2 with the live from PlayStation, or live from PS5 it was called, I think, right? The ad, that was meant to push the system once more and emphasize on the fact that PlayStations were now finally out there, and I guess the generation can truly kick off, right? But that being said, yeah, let's go back to those game releases. We really, at the moment, don't have much of a clue of what is coming. Now, I will say, and I'm always just going to be realistic about it, right? Whatever the next PlayStation showcase is going to be, I'm sure it's going to be exciting. Like, the PlayStation showcases are something entirely different from State of Plays. We've all known this for a long time. The State of Plays are meant to more emphasize third-party titles, stuff like VR, which we saw, of course, last time around. Sometimes they'll take the State of Play to emphasize maybe a single game that therefore can still be quite a big deal. Like, I think they did that with The Last of Us Part 2 right before its release. But that being said, it's the showcases where they actually reveal their big games. Those are the new equivalents of, what used to be their E3 presentations. And so, no doubt that it'll be where we finally get to have a better idea of what's actually coming next for the system. But that being said, with all the talk I just did about their marketing trajectories, I really don't expect it's gonna be a huge list of new titles from PlayStation Studios that will have revealed to us. You can count them on one hand for sure. Maybe it'll just take you 2 or 3 fingers, is what I mean to say. And right now, I think we do have a pretty solid, idea of what those games could be. Because one of them that seems like a pretty safe bet at this point is, of course, The Last of Us Factions, whatever you want to call it, Factions 2. It's probably gonna have a different name altogether, but we've known about this project for several years now already, basically ever since The Last of Us 2's release, where we knew that there was not going to be any factions included, but Naughty Dog promised us we would be seeing the fruits of their labor at some point. They've been openly talking about this project, although we still don't really have any idea of the contents of it. Many people have speculated whether it would just be a direct follow-up to what Factions was for the original Last of Us game, which to me seems a little unlikely. I myself definitely leaned more towards, it's gonna be a kind of Battle Royale concept. But I've also sort of, crawled back from that theory a little bit more, because hearing Neil Druckmann talk about it, I think he recently said that it was their most ambitious project, which I always take with a massive grain of salt, because when the hell is the developer not going to tell you that their new game is their most ambitious project yet? But still, I think the more that I hear them talk about it, the more it becomes clear that, like, it's still going to be story-driven in some type of way. It's still going to have, apparently, like, a real cast of characters, and it's going to be a story that they're trying to tell in a different part of America during this, post-apocalypse setting. So that makes me go like, okay, so is it more gonna be a kind of co-op story-driven type experience? Basically like those Uncharted 2 and 3 levels that you used to have, which I actually was a huge fan of. It's a little weird because they are, again, they are, on one hand, they're telling us all this stuff, but then simultaneously they're calling it a multiplayer project. And I think multiplayer automatically makes us all think a little bit more in the direction of, oh, competitive, right? Whereas if it was a co-op thing, they probably should just want to tell us that it's actually a co-op, experience. But again, it gets very weird and complicated, and we don't really have much of a clue of what it's going to be at all. All that we know is that Factions is going to be that next project. They've been working on this ever since the release of The Last of Us Part 2, which was of course in 2020 already. So they've had quite a while, and we know that Naughty Dog has been kind of in this limbo state almost for a couple years there, where it seems like with Neil Druckmann having left the company for a while to work on that Last of Us TV show and do some pre-production on whatever their next project is going to be. And I guess the same will count for a large chunk of their sort of creative team. It's more the gameplay programmers that were put on, this Factions project, and then the Part 1 remake, which came out last year. This is just kind of the stuff that they've been working on all this time. And so, yeah, I would think that Factions being a multiplayer project, maybe it's going to be the type of deal where they will want to announce it and basically come out with it almost day and date if possible. That, when they eventually, show us what this game is actually going to be at a PlayStation showcase, that they'll already be able to make it playable, whether in beta form or whether actually releasing whatever the project is, by the time that we see it for the first time. That's definitely something that I could see happening. Therefore, I would not be surprised if we're gonna be at least seeing, right, this Factions project in the summer of this year. Maybe a little earlier than that, depending on when the PlayStation Showcase happens. Yeah, and then that we could be actually playing it this year already. I definitely would not count that out, but then again, take, my words with a grain of salt too. It's just a personal hunch that I have. But that's it as far as Last of Us Factions goes. Next up, another big one is obviously Uncharted. I've talked about it now a couple times on the channel, so I don't feel like I need to elaborate on it further, but all the rumors seem to be indicating that Uncharted 5, whatever you want to call it, the Uncharted reboot, the next project, it's finally gonna be happening. We still don't know who will be put in charge of it. Could it be Visual Arts? Could it be Bluepoint perhaps, right? That's definitely a possibility, but Sony is officially hinting at this release already through their Live from PlayStation 5 ad, where we saw what appeared to be a Cassie Drake finding some kind of artifact, and that was clearly a direct hint, I think, at what could be coming next from the franchise. Uncharted rumors have been floating around for literally years. It's been a good 7 years since Uncharted 4 was released and closed off Nathan Drake's story. So I think, enough time has passed for it to feel fresh again for Uncharted to come back, while some people, of course, aren't happy with that whatsoever, and they'd rather Uncharted, stay left behind, I guess, which is totally understandable because they closed off that book so beautifully. That being said, I simply think with how big the franchise is, it is going to be inevitable. Again, PlayStation seems to be getting us ready for what that game is going to be, and therefore I would not rule out that Uncharted 5 will finally be shown in the next PlayStation showcase. That's definitely a big one that I would be betting on. Now, depending on if Bluepoint is actually helping out with that game, is the main studio responsible for it or not, we could also be seeing something entirely different from them, right? Bluepoint has been telling us that they are working on quote-unquote original content for the first time around, which is interesting because it could, mean a number of things, except that it's not going to be another remaster or remake, but therefore Uncharted 5 could totally be what they mean with that, although it could also, of course, be a whole new IP. If that's the case, they're probably gonna need a little bit more time before they actually show it to us, because it's only been about 2.5 years since their most recent release with the Demon's Souls remake. So keep that in mind. If Bluepoint is working on a new game, then it probably won't be announced anytime soon. If it is Uncharted, then it will. However, there's also been some rumors, like I know Colin Moriarty hinted at it, that they would have been made responsible for like a Bloodborne remaster type deal, a way to bring Bloodborne back on PlayStation 5 in 60 frames, looking a little bit more modern. Of course, that game doesn't need the full remake treatment if it comes back, because Bloodborne still looks really good, and It's just mostly the performance of it that is screaming for improvement, so it would definitely be something that I think the PlayStation fanbase would be welcoming with open arms. Finally, I think another studio that we would likely be hearing something from could be Sucker Punch. Their next project probably won't be too hard to guess because Ghost of Tsushima was a massive success. Of course, it's not even been that long since the game came out, but assuming that their next project is a straight-up sequel, then Ghost of Tsushima 2 probably doesn't need as much development time, and yeah, will be ready to be announced relatively soon, and therefore at the next PlayStation Showcase. Doesn't mean that the game is coming out, of course, this year. I definitely do not expect that. It'll probably be a fall 2024 type deal, perhaps even 2025, who knows, right? But again, it's a game that is, you know, ready to be announced. And another one that the Live from PlayStation 5 ad seemed to have been teasing already. At least a lot of people were talking about that, so I wouldn't rule it out in the slightest. Yeah, other than that, I mean, I really don't think there is much more to talk about as far as first-party games goes. When you look at the big PlayStation studios, then Santa Monica probably isn't ready yet. They just brought out God of War Ragnarok. We know that Cory Barlog has been at the helm of a new IP for the studio, but probably will need a lot more time before they are ready to unveil that. Guerrilla Games obviously has come out with Horizon Forbidden West not too long ago. The VR game, literally just came out. There's a studio like Housemarque, which Returnal a lot of people liked, but I feel like Housemarque probably needs more time to work on whatever the next game is. Maybe it's going to be a Returnal sequel, maybe it's going to be something else, but I feel like, you know, it's a relatively small studio and therefore they're just gonna need more time. And maybe there's a studio like Sony Bend, of course, as well, which we know was basically forced to work on that next Uncharted game all the way up until 2021, when their own studio kind of found themselves in limbo after the launch of Days Gone. And it wasn't since then, early 2021, that they've been able to move on and start working on a whole new IP altogether. But once again, it'll just need, I think, a bunch more time before they're ready to show that. Other than that, we'll see a bunch of third-party, news. You could think of, for example, Kojima showing off Death Stranding 2, more footage from that, which is, a clear-cut 2024 release. And I think Kojima also has a bit of a, he has a special deal once again with PlayStation, right? Because the game obviously still being built on Decima's engine. It's coming out first, I think, on PlayStation 5. So that's enough reason for them to want to show it at a PlayStation Showcase. We've recently had some other rumors like Metal Gear Solid 3. Literally this week I saw that somebody from VGC hinted that Konami is planning to have a pretty big E3, quote-unquote, claiming that both a new Castlevania is set to appear alongside the much-rumored Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake. I don't know if it'll really go well if they would want to show that off alongside of something like Death Stranding 2, and if Kojima would be cool with it himself. Otherwise, that game could be going to Microsoft for sure. But yeah, as far as third-party games goes, I don't think I need to tell you that there is literally limitless potential, whether it's going to be new games from Ubisoft, from EA, from, well, Activision while it lasts, but that probably won't be too long. Although, even that story just keeps going on, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of it. But I really think that people need to be realistic about their expectations, right? I've talked about a couple of big projects that I definitely can see being announced here from PlayStation's own studios. Mainly that is, like I said, The Last of Us Factions. It is possibly Uncharted 5. It is whatever Bluepoint is working on, and it's going to be Ghost of Tsushima's sequel. But I would already be very positively surprised if all of these actually get shown in the first place. We know that, Spider-Man 2, with it coming out, it's basically guaranteed that we're going to be seeing some gameplay of it at the showcase as well, and that's going to be exciting. Insomniac is, of course, also working on Wolverine. I don't know if they would want to be willing/able to show that alongside already as well. Insomniac definitely has become one of PlayStation's most important studios by far, and the studio that seems to be pumping out content much faster than all the other ones. Very, commendable, of course. Just looking at the fact that we've had Spider-Man's DLC, Miles Morales, a Ratchet & Clank game, and now here they are already announcing, both Spider-Man 2, which is coming out this year, and then, the next project, which is Wolverine, that has a lot of people very excited. I just wouldn't put it past them in the slightest that we are already going to be seeing a little bit of a glimpse of what the Wolverine game is going to be looking like. But of course, that's something for next year, if not 2025. But it's clearly something that is also going to be shown off in the relatively nearby future. Other than that, as always, make sure to keep your expectations tempered. Simply approach it from a realistic angle. Go and look back at what the PlayStation Showcase in 2021 looked like, and you'll realize that it really wasn't even that much to write home about. We had a couple of big games there. We had the God of War Ragnarok trailer, the announcement of Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine, maybe something like the Knights of the Old Republic remake, which I don't even know what's going on with that game anymore. But the showcase was also filled by a bunch of, well, relatively filler content, if you'd ask me. We had more GTA 5, we had like a Borderlands, or, you know, Tina's Wonderland, or whatever it was called, that game, right? Rainbow Six Extraction, Forspoken, we all know how that turned out. An Alan Wake remaster that looked more like a patch. I mean, the showcase will always have a couple of bangers, but it's not to say that you should have completely unrealistic expectations of what it's going to be offering either. With that being said, guys, I want to know from you all in the comments, what are you excited for from a next potential PlayStation showcase? Let me know all of that in the comments. What are your most anticipated games? Which announcements would you most like to see? And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Of course, make sure that you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because I'll continue to be bringing you, you know, my opinions and takes on the latest gaming news here on a weekly basis. And then with that being said, I want to thank you all a lot for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you back in the next video.